Welcome to Crime Confessions, where we delve into the darkest corners of true crime, unraveling mysteries and uncovering the hidden truths behind some of the most chilling cases.
I'm Olivia Hayes.
And I'm Liam Bennett. Today, we're bringing you the harrowing story of the Bear Brook Murders, one of the most perplexing and disturbing cold cases in American history.
As we explore the dark secrets hidden within Bear Brook State Park, a place where nature's beauty conceals a decades-old mystery that would leave investigators, families, and an entire community searching for answers.
And ignite a search for truth that continues to this day. Bear Brook State Park, located in the small town of Allenstown, New Hampshire, was a place where families gathered, where children played, and where nature provided a welcome escape from the hustle of daily life. But in the fall of 1985, the park would become the scene of a gruesome discovery.
A passerby, making their way through the dense woods, came across a large 55-gallon metal barrel. It was old, rusted, and seemingly out of place in the natural surroundings. But what they found inside would turn their quiet day in the park into a nightmare.
Inside the barrel were the decomposed remains of a woman and a young girl. Their bodies were wrapped in plastic, carefully placed inside the barrel. The authorities were called, and what began as a routine investigation would soon unravel into one of New Hampshire's most notorious cold cases.
Allenstown was a small, tight-knit community where everyone knew each other, and crime was a rarity. The discovery of the two bodies sent shockwaves through the town, leaving residents fearful and anxious.
Local law enforcement, unaccustomed to dealing with such heinous crimes, quickly mobilized. They scoured missing persons reports, conducted interviews with residents, and set up roadblocks to gather information. But despite their best efforts, the identities of the victims remained unknown.
The forensic capabilities at the time were limited. DNA analysis, which is now a cornerstone of criminal investigations, was in its infancy. Investigators had to rely on more traditional methods: dental records, fingerprints, and facial reconstruction, all of which yielded no results. The lack of a match in any database meant that these victims had slipped through the cracks.
Months turned into years, and the case grew cold. The woman and the child, now known as the Bear Brook Jane Does, were laid to rest, but their identities and the circumstances of their deaths remained a mystery.
15 years passed. The case was nearly forgotten, except by a few dedicated investigators and the families of the victims who still clung to hope. Then, in May 2000, a startling discovery was made that would breathe new life into the investigation.
Another barrel, almost identical to the first, was found just a few hundred feet away. Inside were the remains of two more young girls, their bodies also wrapped in plastic and carefully placed in the barrel. The similarities were undeniable. The same method, the same location, and the same chilling disregard for human life.
The discovery shocked the community once again. It confirmed what many had feared. A serial killer had been at work, and these murders were not isolated incidents. But who were these girls, and why had it taken 15 years to find them?
The second discovery reopened the investigation, but it also raised more questions than it answered. The case had grown colder, and despite the best efforts of law enforcement, the identity of the victims and the killer remained a mystery.
For the next decade, the Bear Brook Murders became one of New Hampshire's most notorious cold cases. Despite occasional leads and the dedication of a few investigators, the case remained unsolved.
The community of Allenstown tried to move on, but the specter of the murders lingered. Families of the victims, though unknown, were left without closure. The detectives who had worked the case were haunted by the faces of the unidentified victims, knowing that somewhere out there their families were waiting for answers.
cold cases like Bear Brook are particularly challenging. As time passes, evidence degrades, witnesses disappear, and memories fade. But for those who worked on the case, the commitment to finding justice never wavered.
By the early 2010s, forensic science had advanced significantly. DNA technology had become a powerful tool in solving cold cases, and new techniques like genetic genealogy were beginning to emerge. These developments would soon prove crucial in cracking the Bear Brook case wide open.
In 2017, more than 30 years after the first barrel was discovered, a breakthrough came in the form of genetic genealogy, a cutting-edge technique that uses DNA to build family trees and identify unknown individuals.
Traditional DNA analysis compares crime scene DNA to known profiles in law enforcement databases. But when those databases yield no matches, genetic genealogy steps in. By comparing the DNA to public databases, where people voluntarily submit their DNA for ancestry research, investigators can find distant relatives and from there build a family tree that leads back to the individual in question.
Forensic genealogist Barbara Ray Venter, who had previously helped solve the Golden State Killer case, was brought in to assist. Using the DNA profiles from the Bear Brook victims, she and her team painstakingly built family trees, tracing the lineage of the victims through distant relatives.
After months of work, the genealogists identified a man named Peder Rasmussen as the likely perpetrator. Known by many aliases, including Bob Evans and Curtis Mayo Kimball, Rasmussen had a long history of violent crime, including the murder of a woman in California.
Rasmussen, dubbed the Chameleon Killer, for his ability to blend into different communities and assume new identities, had evaded capture for years. His true identity was only uncovered after his death in 2010, when DNA linked him to the murder of his girlfriend in California. Now, the same DNA had linked him to the Bear Brook Murders.
With Rasmussen identified as the killer, the focus shifted to identifying the victims. Genetic genealogy once again played a crucial role. After months of research, the victims were identified as Marlis Honeychurch and her two daughters, Sarah McWaters and Marie Vaughn.
Marlis had met Rasmussen in the late 1970s, and together they had traveled across the country, moving frequently and living under various aliases. By the time they reached New Hampshire, Marlis and her daughters had become isolated from their family and friends, making it easier for Rasmussen to control them.
For years, Marlis's family had wondered what had happened to her and the girls. They had filed missing persons reports, but without any concrete leads, the case had gone cold. The identification of the Bear Brook victims brought them some closure, but it also opened up new wounds.
One victim remains unidentified, a young girl who was also found in the second barrel. Genetic analysis suggests she was Rasmussen's biological daughter, but her identity remains unknown. She is the last remaining mystery of the Bear Brook case, a haunting reminder of the lives Rasmussen destroyed.
Why did Peder Rasmussen commit these horrific murders? What drove him to target vulnerable women and children, and how did he manage to evade detection for so long? These are questions that continue to perplex investigators and criminal psychologists alike.
Rasmussen's life was marked by violence, manipulation, and a complete disregard for human life. He was a drifter, moving from place to place, leaving a trail of victims in his wake. Some believe he may have killed others during his travels, and that the Bear Brook murders are just one chapter in a much larger, darker story.
Psychologists who have studied Rasmussen's behavior describe him as a classic sociopath, charming, manipulative, and utterly devoid of empathy. His ability to assume new identities and blend into different communities made him a particularly dangerous predator, and his crimes went undetected for years.
As the investigation into Rasmussen continues, law enforcement agencies across the country are re-examining unsolved cases that fit his pattern of behavior. Could he be responsible for other murders? And if so, how many more victims are out there?
Bear Brook State Park is now a place of pilgrimage for true crime enthusiasts, a reminder of the evil that can lurk in the most unexpected places. But the search for answers is far from over.
As technology advances and public interest in cold cases grows, there is hope that the final pieces of this puzzle will one day be found. But until then, the Bear Brook murders remain a chilling testament to the darkness that can hide in plain sight.
The Bear Brook case has become a symbol of the power of persistence, of the importance of never giving up, even when all hope seems lost. It is a story of loss, of tragedy, but also of the resilience of those who seek justice.
Thank you for joining us on this journey through one of America's most haunting cold cases.
If you found this story compelling, please like, share, and subscribe to Crime Confessions for more in-depth true crime coverage.
And remember, stay curious, stay vigilant, and stay safe.